Thanks for coming, especially tonight in the snow. Tonight I'm pleased to have with us the artist Doris Salcedo. Doris is presently in residence at Harvard Center for the Study of World Religions as a 40th anniversary fellow working with Religion in the Arts Initiative at the center and with the Fogg Museum. Her residency at the university will result in a proposal for a new work of art involving religious themes of memorial, sacrality, and communal memory. Her fellowship was made possible in part by generous support from the David Rockefeller Center for Latin American Studies, a university-wide initiative whose mission is to increase knowledge of the cultures, histories, economies, environments, and contemporary affairs of Latin America. Born in Bogota, Colombia, where she also studied fine arts and art history, Doris Salcedo received her bachelor in the fine arts in 1980. And in 1984, Doris received her master's in sculpture at New York University. Doris is also a professor of sculpture and art theory at the University of Colombia in Bogota. She has been exhibiting internationally since 1985 in galleries and museums and was included in Documenta 11 in Kassel, Germany this past year. Victims of violence in Colombia are known as the disappeared. Doris Salcedo makes the disappeared visible by telling their stories through sculpture that often include objects of the victims. I believe I first saw Doris's work in an exhibition at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston in the late 80s or early 90s. The entitled piece was a child's crib with its bars removed and replaced with steel mesh, fabric, and wax that was weaved around the crib, creating a wall of security or entrapment. It was a very elegant nightmare and had an incredible presence, not unlike the work of the German artist Joseph Beuys. I knew I would be hearing and seeing about this work again, and here you are. So please join me in a very warm welcome, Doris Salcedo.
When I'm invited to talk about my work, I try to avoid describing it. So tonight I'm not going to address the slides I'm projecting, but if anybody has any questions, at the end we can talk about any of the pieces that I have shown. I try to avoid describing the work because I believe descriptions are useless, since the very reason to make art is to create an encounter, a rendezvous, as Marcel Duchamp said, of the viewer with the work of art. I think a description of my pieces will interfere with this encounter. Therefore, today I'm going to focus on the positions I assume from where I make most of my pieces. The poet Paul Celan wrote that art is the distance one must cover to encounter the other. Quote, "Art requires that we travel a certain space in a certain direction on a certain road," unquote. So, following Celan's advice, I am going just to talk about my work, and following Celan's advice, I always orient myself in a specific direction every time I am going to make a piece. First of all, I would like to say that I think of my work as a collaboration. As a sculptor, I see myself as a crossing point. I see myself as the terrain where the tragic experience of the victims of violence, the material traces left in objects, and some contemporary thinking meet. To begin a piece, there is first of all a testimony. Then comes a material object that has traces of everyday life, and my intuition is always guided by the reading of a thinker. Therefore, tonight, you will see how these three elements relate and intertwine. It is not by chance that I will quote a lot of writers tonight along this talk. The first conscious decision I made as an artist was to be immersed in a world where contemplation, distance, and indifference are not possible. I decided to live in Colombia, a country at war, as you know. I believe that in order to comprehend our situation, in order to comprehend our reality, it is not enough to define it or to analyze it from a comfortable distance. It is essential to find ourselves in a sensible disposition towards that reality. To think a specific reality is no longer to contemplate it, but to commit oneself to it. As the philosopher Emmanuel Levinas says, quote, to be engulfed by that which one thinks, to be involved, that is the dramatic event of being in the world, unquote. Therefore, I decided to be involved in the world of tragedy. I decided to be involved in the world of political violence. My task as an artist is to make sense out of brutal facts. My work is an attempt to make violent reality intelligible. Needless to say, a lifetime is not enough for such a task. In the third world, we are well aware of the fact that human beings do not triumph over external reality. We must produce meaning out of the tension and chaos generated by our harsh conditions. So, making art as a way of understanding reality, making art as a way of comprehending reality. It is because human actions can become intelligible or have been rendered intelligible by artists and by philosophers that there is humanity. Oops. So, searching for humanity, searching for what is purely human in the middle of inhuman acts and inhuman conditions is what has guided always my work. But what is that element that we can identify as purely human, and where can we find it? I found an answer to these questions in the writing of the philosopher Franz Rosenzweig. He explained that what is purely human is what is equal in all of us, and this purely human element is awakened in tragedy. The common element in all of us is humanness. The human element equal in all of us is not to be found in the peculiarities or in the personality of the individual, nor in race, religion, or cultural differences. It is found in the self. The self within man is what is mute and universal. The self as the expression of the human condition. Rosenzweig said that the hero of Greek tragedy embodies this solitary self, cut off from all relations to the world, and his destiny is marked by two fundamental experiences, the encounter with Eros and the encounter with death or Thanatos. The tragic hero awakens himself in Eros and accomplishes himself in the encounter with death. Death is silence, is the impossibility of dialogue. Art is communication without words. Art is silence. Art is also mediation, and therefore it enables a self enclosed in his own tragedy to awaken another self who is just as solitary. Art is the awakening of the human as tragic solitude, as fear and pity. Fear and compassion are the only feelings capable of confronting and breaking egoism, capable of awakening solidarity among human beings. As we see, art does not create a direct and true communication, as language, as speech does. But nevertheless, it awakens outside the boundaries of time an ephemeral community. This piece, Atrabiliarius, is an attempt to form an ephemeral community, the community of the missed people, of the disappeared ones, by making public the silence and private pain of each single family. Through art, I am trying to take this problem into the realm of the public, transforming an individual tragedy into a social phenomenon. On the other hand, there is an attempt to form an even more ephemeral community. That is the one that takes place during the very brief moments when the viewer contemplates in silence a work of art. This ephemeral community happens once the interrupted life of the victim, present in the artwork, reaches out to find the memories of pain inscribed on every single viewer's memory. The historical existence of man has always been of interest to thinkers, to artists, because it is dramatic. Once again, Levinas gave us a perfect example of this. Quote, "Comedy begins with the simplest of our movement, each of which carries with it an inevitable awkwardness. In putting out the hand to approach a chair, I have torn the sleeve of my jacket. I have scratched the floor, and I have dropped the ash of my cigarette. In doing that which I want to do, I have done so many things I did not want to do. The act has not been pure, for I have left some traces. When the awkwardness of the act turns against the goal search, we are at the height of tragedy." Unquote. What is important about this passage is that it emphasizes that our knowledge and our mastery of reality through consciousness does not exhaust our relation with reality. It goes far beyond consciousness. Knowledge and control are rather precarious tools to deal with reality. But comedy and tragedy are always present in our lives. And as we have seen, one can quickly turn into the other. This awkward juxtaposition of materials testifies to this fact. As you know, I have not focused my work on Greek tragedy, but I have centered my attention on political violence and how human life is manipulated by calculations of power. I have focused on extreme forms of political violence, forceful displacement, disappearance, massacres, persecution, and persecution that end in death. My work is about the ones that had been expelled from their place and have nothing left, nothing but the vulnerability of their own skin, as Levinas wrote, or as Paul Celan said, the ones that are unsheltered even by the traditional tent of the sky. My research has always led me to cases where the victim is persecuted beyond the possibility of self-defense. The victim has no defense in language because the possibility of an apology has been ruled out. So the victim becomes a solitary being for whom the mediation of language is not possible anymore. Consequently, there is no one the victim can talk to, no one would listen to him. There is just silence, silence as a sign of solitude. I focus on political violence, violence that is exerted against people who are invisible. There are always plenty of political, historical, or personal reasons that led the ones that wish to kill to declare whole civilian populations as invisible ones, as military targets. So they won't see the individuals who suffer and can center their attention on the historical reasons that justifies and legitimizes their killing. My work tries to address those who we fail to see and those who we don't want to speak to either. I would like to think and rethink these aspects from Levinas's point of view. He says that when we neglect a person, when we decide not to see his face, not to recognize the totality of a life, not to hear and not to speak to a person, we do this in order to neglect and to negate him. Partial negation is the beginning of violence. Levinas writes, quote, "Partial negation is violence because it denies the independence of a person. Not to see the face of the other implies to negate his existence," unquote. For this reason, the Greek term for face, prosopon, means literally what stands before the eyes, what gives itself to be seen. To see the one that is different from me, to see that person with indifference, is to look at a person as we look at objects, with the same indifference that we gaze an object that we possess. We look with indifference because we possess it, but in contrast, we look with great interest the ones that we desire. When someone belongs to me as an object, I can deny their existence. When a person is seen as an instrument, a tool, just a mean, his life is also an end to fulfill political purposes. The person that is considered utterly different, the other, whose negation announces his killing, is the sole being that I wish to kill. No one wishes to kill someone that is considered his equal. On the other hand, making art implies the very opposite scenario. It implies paying attention to every single detail of life. When I began a piece, I tried to understand the victim of violence in the framework of his own history, his surroundings, his family, his habits, absolutely everything. At that point, the other, the utterly different, becomes a human being in the splendor of a complete life. What my work tries to present is the fact that the past cannot be recuperated by representation. Even if we try to use memory and history, there is no aesthetic redemption. In my work, I try in vain to recuperate the irreversible. It is an attempt to synchronize different times, but we know very well that there is no common measure between the past and the present tense. This furniture filled with concrete is the impossibility of bringing past events to the present. It embodies the awkward juxtaposition of different acts, different times, different feelings, different interests. All of this gives tension to these pieces. More than mute objects, I see these pieces as acts, useless actions, as if I could affect reality. They are, I repeat, a vain attempt to bring the presence of a victim back to our present time. These pieces stand as pure absence. All of my work is based on individual cases that are of very little interest to historians and to the Colombian system of justice. In order to make a piece, I try to find individuals who have endured violence and who have endured extreme experiences. I look for the individual as faces, as a real presence, but in most cases, I encounter just the impossibility of finding the person, because the person is gone and all that is left is a trace, and all that is felt is his silence. All that remains beyond my possibilities, beyond my reach. There is nothing I can grasp of that life that is gone long ago. This is what my work is all about. My work is about impotence, a sum of impotences. Not being able to solve anything, not being able to fix a problem, not knowing, not seeing, not being able to grasp the presence of the present that is gone. For me, art is a lack of power. Art as a lack of power. The viewer, I believe, also experiences to some degree the same impotence, especially Mark, by the fact that there is not much to see in these pieces. So not being able to see and not being able to possess is obviously a lack of power. Instead, the viewer is left with the impossibility of seeing, which brings about the sensation of proximity. There could almost be a presence, and yet there is only absence. Thinkers I have quoted a lot tonight, like Celan or Rosenzweig, place the artist in the realm of the inhuman. Celan wrote that the artist must go, quote, beyond what is human, stepping into a realm which is turned toward the human, but uncanny. The realm where the monkey, the automaton, the Medusa's head, and with them art seems to be at home, unquote. Killing is the absolute manifestation of power. In order to kill, the one that kills strips his victim from his human status. We all know that before going to war, it is essential to construct the image of the enemy. This image is, of course, an imaginary one. The war machine needs to mark the limit between what is considered acceptable, human, and separated radically from what it considers inhuman behavior. Every machine of war needs to build an quote-unquote ethical system from which to exclude the ones that are considered to be different. No ethical system that excludes a part of humanity can be genuine, no matter how unpleasant or how difficult it is for us to see that part of humanity. Every single human being is a human being. We cannot destitute a person from mankind. As I was saying, killing is the manifestation of absolute power, and there is nothing art can do against absolute power. When facing absolute power, we can say that art is useless, is impotent in most aspects. But even if what I'm going to see sounds like a contradiction, I think art has a tremendous power. It has the power to bring back into the realm of life, into the realm of humanity, the life that has been desecrated. As the philosopher Giorgio Agamben has explained, quote, When the subject gives account of his own ruin, life subsists. Maybe in the infamy in which it existed, but it subsists. In this sense, art allows the continuation of life. Therefore, in these pieces, I do not see only the memory of oppressed existence, but the light of immemorial ethos. Beyond the biographical element, art bears witness to life. Jeanne Marie, a survivor from Auschwitz, wrote about the importance of art in relation to death. He said that the concentration camps were the collapse of the aesthetic view of death, which in many ways was the legacy of German Romanticism. In his text, he mentioned Novalis, Schopenhauer, Wagner, and Thomas Mann, and then he says, quote, "No bridge leads from death in Auschwitz to Thomas Mann, death in Venice." The aesthetic view of death reveals an ethic view of life. And when the aesthetic view of death collapses, Auschwitz becomes possible. When we see a trace, the first thing we know is that someone has already passed. A trace is what is utterly past, what is irreversible. A trace is what signifies without making appearance. Through art, we establish a relationship with an irreversible past. Traces disrupt the order of the present in which we live. A trace is the past of him who left the trace, of the person who delivered the sign. Therefore, a trace is beyond myself. To recognize a trace is to orient myself toward the other, to the one who left that trace. But this other will always remain absent for me. This piece, Casa Viuda, is about traces. In any given image or in any given objects, there is the absent content of previous events that each single object carries. Any object, a shoe, a table, a door, carries certain intelligibility that adds meaning to the pieces that I make. Each object has been invested with memory. Every object, in consequence, is invested with meaning. I look carefully for the meaning inscribed on each object. My work simply is to try to make these traces more evident, to try to enhance these traces. Objects, like words, have to be placed in the proper context in order to be understood. They have to be connected with something that already happened. They have to be connected to history. The identity of things brings back the identity of their history. Just like language, experience does appear to be made of isolated elements. One cannot present an isolated image and in a space of its own and hope it has a meaning by itself. Images signify only on the basis of the world that they refer to, and on the confrontation of the position of the viewer with the position of the artist. I think that the meaning of a work of art arises in the confrontation of these different points of view. The world of the victim, my own world as an artist, and the world of the viewer. To be an artist means to be embedded in the present. But thinking of the present implies thinking of the past. To act in the present as an artist is to link my work to history, to real events, and to testimonies. Nietzsche wrote, quote, "We will then think the past against the present and resist the later, not in favor of a return, but in favor, I hope, of a time to come, unquote. Man has the need to draw from the past criteria to act in the present. When man does not understand his past, his own history, he is deprived of reference points and finds himself suspended between a past that is perceived as an accumulation of incomprehensible events and a future that he cannot possess. Therefore, it seems like an abyss in front of him. The past is the only place where we can find both our origin and our destiny. The work of art is the place in which old and new resolve its conflict. In art, we appropriate historical space, which is the present and concrete space in which to act. I do not see art as representation. I see art as experience. Therefore, the relation of art and history is absolutely essential. It means to work for the future, beyond an epoch, and mainly beyond oneself. Art allows understanding among human beings because artistic expression assembles human experience into meaning, and therefore it can enhance knowledge. Art makes the understanding of human beings a little bit more possible. Art not only presents the concrete experience of an individual, but it must go beyond the individual. It must be invested with the whole density of history. The meaning it expresses has to be always multiple. That is, to go beyond my own experience, to go beyond myself into the other. I believe a work of art assembles in itself or gathers in itself different ways of being. This is the reason why there are as many meanings to a work of art, to a piece, as viewers that approach it. It gathers in one object the dispersion of an epoch. It gives meaning to the time in which we live. In the past 4 years, I decided to work about a violent event that took place in Bogota 17 years ago on November 6th and 7th, 1985. A guerrilla commando took by force the building of Colombia's Supreme Court. In less than an hour, the army retaliated in a brutal way, and as a result, a 2-day total war broke out in the very center of Bogota. Approximately 126 people died, including the justices. The building was in flames, few human remains were found, nothing but ashes. In its place, this new building that you are seeing was built on top of the old building. The ruins were removed and this new horrible building was built in place. In this case, I faced a past event whose memory was purposely being effaced. The objects and the site that bears the traces of violence have been destroyed in order to impose oblivion. In this case, my task is to try to turn this intentional oblivion, this no longer present, into a still here, into a presence. When there are no traces, only one thing remains for us to commemorate on, and that is a date. So this date is November 6th and 7th. This is an ephemeral piece that I made on the 6th and 7th of November of this year, and it lasted 2 days. It had the same timing as the battle. The battle began November 6th, 1985 at 11:35, and at 11:35 we start sliding down one empty chair along this wall. and then we continue the same action for 2 days, this exact same time that the battle lasted. This piece is rooted in the memory of a very specific event. It's rooted in the memory of a date. This date is an irreplaceable date for the families of the victims, and it is an irreplaceable date for anybody who's willing to remember. It is a date that belongs to the past, but on each anniversary, it announces its returns. It is also a date to come. As Derrida put it, the date, quote, "The date is a future anterior. A date is also the anniversaries to come," unquote. In this piece, I needed to break with the specific aspect of the event, bringing it out of the past so it could become a memento, a memorandum for all of us in the present, not just for the few who witnessed this event. A work of art must conjoin several different events, so the same date commemorates heterogeneous events, but similar events. Derrida writes in his essay on Celan that, quote, "A date is a specter. A commemoration announces the spectral return of that which, unique in occurrence, will never return. What one commemorates will be the date of that which could never come back." In this, the most violent of epochs, we are forced to face the emptiness and nothingness of war, the loss of war. So in this time, the search for meaning is centered around the irrepressible activity of remembrance. This process of remembrance must begin with the inscription of the date in a work of art, if it is to last longer. The work of art speaks even if none of its references are intelligible. It speaks to the other. Art is addressing another, an altogether other. Even if it does not reach the person it is addressing, the main issue is that art addresses, takes place. Derrida again says that even in the absence of a witness, what counts is that address takes place, because the presence of a reminder, the presence of a memorandum allowed us to commemorate, celebrate, and bless. Therefore, in order to construct an object invested with cultural signification, in order to make a work of art, I have to go toward the other. My work is a relationship with that person whom I try to express. His presence is a requirement for my work. The victim of violence is prior to my work. The victims of violence invest my work with meaning. My work comes from the experience of the person to whom I am dedicating and to whom I am addressing my work. Thank you.
Some questions? Anyone? Dan?
You just spoke now about the person to whom you dedicated and addressed the work. In the Palace of Justice piece, that was commemorating a specific event and a specific group of people. Were the other pieces that you showed us also dedicated to specific individuals and specific events?
Yes. I mean, every single piece I make begins with a testimony. So there is always a real victim behind the piece. And there is always a research that lead me to find that victim. But in the process of making the piece, I have to erase, in a way, the very specific aspects of what happened to that person in order to make it readable. And so it means something for all of us, not just for the family or for the friends or for Colombians, to put it in a way. One aspect that I'm always against is when my work is referred just as the work that is referring to political violence that occurs in Colombia, down there. I do not want my work to be that, because I think there is plenty of suffering all over the world. And I think it's, as we put it there, within the sphere of the private victim, then we remove it from our world. It is like it has nothing to do with us. So the idea is to come and find this person. We all have memories of pain, physical and emotional pain. We have all experienced it to a lesser or whatever degree. But so the important thing is not that there is a real testimony, that there is a real victim. Yes, there is a real victim. But for us, once the piece is made, the piece should be able, if it's any good, it should be able to relate to everybody.
Considering what you've just said, the relationship of the work to actually being in Bogota is important to you. I guess the question is, recognizing that suffering is universal, would it be possible for you to make this kind of work, for example, if you lived in Cambridge?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, if there is an event to commemorate, if there were an event to commemorate, I would. Not just because what I think it's important is that it is, my work is about memory, but it's also, it's a memory that is looking for history, because I think memory also is individual, and memory can become fantasy many times. You know, we all know that memories change, and we change memory according to our needs. So I like this juxtaposition of memory, private memory, and history. So if there were a historical event to commemorate, yeah, absolutely, I could make the piece anywhere.
Why do you choose to use the chair for the door?
One thing that I think it's important is that I do not acknowledge there is such a thing as an artistic freedom. I don't think the artist make choices or create things or is free to do anything. I think one does what one has to do. And so according to the testimony, there is always, in the testimonies, there is always, people make reference to different objects, to different situations. So I simply obey. I do what they tell me to do. I do not believe at all in freedom, in artistic freedom.
I was just wondering how the victims that you speak to, how are they an audience for your work?
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
The victims that you speak to that are an inspiration for your work, how are they an audience for it? Since they're being shown in places other than where they are. I'm just wondering how they interact with it, and if it's supposed to be healing for them, or if it's just or if it's mainly for your dealing with it as an artist.
I don't think there's such a thing as my dealing with it as an artist. And as I was saying at the end of the talk, I don't think it is essential that the artist, in the process of making the piece, finds the person who the piece is being addressed to. I don't think it is essential. It's like when you throw a bottle with a message to the sea. Somebody will receive it. You don't know exactly who will going to get that message, or if it's going to be received at all. I think a work of art is made in this exact same manner. It is always made in one place, and it's always made from one date. So it's like when you are writing a letter. You know, you say Cambridge, December the 5th. And from here and from now, you're writing this letter. But then you put it in a bottle and throw it to the sea, and you don't know who's going to receive it. And from that point of view, I work. I think that what it is important is that we are addressing these issues. I think what it is important is that artists are here to establish a relationship between all human beings and a primordial reality, which is death. I think we are all finite human beings, of course. We're not to last very long. And so what it is important is to mark that and to address another, and that's it. It's not up to me to take the piece exactly to such and such audience. I think that is somebody else's task. And I don't think, if a work of art is known or is not known, is shown or is not shown, it's not up to me. My task is a different one.
Growing up in Bogota, I was always struck by the absence of public memorials and memorials that would talk about, the history of violence in the country. And I'm just wondering if you have created any such memorials outside the space of the museum or outside or memorials that last longer than the piece of the Palacio de Justicia that we saw.
I do not believe in permanent memorials. I believe that when we make permanent memorials, we take we have the responsibility to remember. We, human beings, we are responsible for doing this remembering. And when we make a permanent piece, we impose the responsibility on an object. It's like if I make a sculpture here, then I decide, here you are to remember. And I do not think objects are capable of remembering. I think human beings are capable of remembering. That's why I made an ephemeral piece, and I do believe in memorials, but only in terms of ephemeral pieces. I do not believe in permanent memorials. I think they become useless. Time changes the meaning, and then they become meaningless and invisible. I really don't believe in permanent memorials.
Okay. Any more questions? Just a couple more, Brian.
I'm just curious, since you're making approximations of the traces that were left by the people, since you're memorializing, I'm interested in how you reconcile. You said that the trace is part of the person who left the trace, but since technically you're making the mark, how does that sort of become the trace of the person that you're recognizing?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Since you're making the mark on the piece, but it represents, you're talking about how it's a trace from the person that the piece is about.
Yeah.
I'm curious how you sort of reconcile that, since you're actually the person.
Yeah, well, in most cases, I think as you saw, I respect the object. I do not, if it is a door, it remains a door. If it is a bed, you can see the bed. So that's how I reconcile that. I respect what I find. I just juxtapose ideas. That's all I do. I bring together things that are different, that have different origins. So I just try to make more evident what I think it is already there. So if I am working based on a testimony of somebody that comes from the countryside and had access to very few material objects, then I limit myself to those elements that person would have had access to. Or each case is different. That's why each image varies. And that's how I think I try to reconcile.
Okay, I think we should end here, and please join us upstairs for the reception for Doris, as well as the opening of the student show. Thank you.